Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Imperfectly Empowered podcast. I am your host, ahnafulmer. Today, we have Jenny Swisher back on the podcast. In case you missed it, she was on the podcast earlier and she chatted all about how to sync your hormones with your fitness and nutrition. She is a fitness coach and she specifically is an expert on hormonal health for women and how to leverage your cycle to maximize fitness and nutrition. Be sure to check out that podcast. But today, she is actually coming on the podcast to chat about her journey with infertility and adoption. Jenny is the mom of two adopted daughters. Her and her husband both adopted two sweet little girls. And Jenny herself was also adopted. She has an incredibly unique perspective, and I cannot wait to dive into it with her. For those of you new around here, or maybe you have been hanging out with me here on the Imperfectly Empowered podcast, but you are not aware that we are also adopting. Adoption is something very near and dear to my heart. We are adopting our fourth child, a little boy from the Pacific island of Samoa. We are 3 years into the process, and we, God willing, are scheduled kind of on time to be matched with our son this year. We don't know who he is yet, but that should be happening this year. And then again, God willing, we will be able to bring him home next year in 2023. So it is something I'm very passionate about. I cannot wait to dive into it. Friends, welcome Jenny Swisher. Well, Jenny, welcome to the podcast. I should say welcome back to the podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be here.
I am so excited about this conversation. After our first interview, you and I got talking about adoption. We were like, okay, we just need to have each other back on because we have so much to say. So much to talk about. Your story is so unique. And what I love about your perspective is unlike mine. So I am an adoptive mom. I haven't been matched with my son yet, but it is certainly, he's already mine. I just don't know who he is yet. So I still say that I'm an adoptive mom, but I was not adopted myself. And I love your perspective. I'm excited to dive into your perspective because I think it is the unique opportunity to hear from somebody who was adopted and is now adopting. So let's rewind and kind of go back to the beginning a little bit. Tell me a little of your story and what it was like to grow up as an adopted daughter.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks again for having me back on here. I agree with you that it needs its own separate episode, right? To dive into this subject of adoption. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And obviously it is part of my story in so many ways. So I was adopted at birth, and my story is quite unique. There are pieces of my story that I know, and probably a lot of pieces that I don't know. So I was born in the early 80s when there wasn't, especially compared to now, there was a lot of sort of informal processes around adoption then, whereas now there's a lot more paperwork and a lot more formality. So for me, my adoptive mother, which I consider my mother, she had a hysterectomy and was in her OBGYN's office for an annual exam. And he just happened to say to her, like, I think I may have met someone who is pregnant who I'm going to try to connect you to the baby. Like the OBGYN told my mother this. And
had she wanted to adopt, or was that totally out of the blue?
She had just had a hysterectomy, maybe like a couple of years before, and met my dad. And she'd always wanted children. So the OBGYN knew that. Yes. And so
otherwise that's like, boom.
Yeah.
So, was not expecting that on this visit. Okay.
He knew that. He knew it. And so I guess previously to that, my birth mother had walked into his office about 8.5 months pregnant for the first time saying, I have this baby and I'm looking to give this child up for adoption. And I need your help. So he was sort of the magician behind the scenes, I guess, to make that connection happen. And so he informed my mother of that. She and my dad hired an attorney, and I was born in the state of Ohio. So they had to cross state line with me, which meant they had to have an attorney take care of all of that. And very similar to now, the interstate contract was in effect. So long story short, I was born in the hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was completely healthy. But in order to make this magic happen, the OBGYN had to actually write a false diagnosis. He said that there was something wrong with my stomach. to keep me in the hospital so that they could get the paperwork worked out for my parents to adopt me. Otherwise, I most likely would have gone into foster care or into like the Catholic adoption system in Cincinnati. So my parents hired the attorney, and then I spent 2 or 3 days in the hospital until all of that was worked out. And then the attorney himself and his assistant drove me across the state line and brought me to Indiana. And I grew up an adopted child right alongside my brother. My brother is 4 years younger than me. He was also adopted. And so we were not biological brother and sister, but we were certainly siblings. And so adoption's always just been part of who I am. And from a very young age, I just have always known it. There was never any sort of like moment, when my parents sat me down and said, okay, well, we want to tell you you're adopted. Like I always knew it. I grew up knowing that's how I began, I guess.
How did they have those conversations with you? Because I will say, I think that's unique for their generation. It was not discussed as openly. Now, so let's also talk race. Are you the same race as your parents?
Yes.
And what about your brother?
Yes. So my brother,
you looked like them.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really kind of funny. And I tell this story a lot because my adoptive mother is very dark featured. So she has jet black hair, dark eyes, and I look really nothing like her. Aside from that, we have the same skin color. And my dad was bald-headed. He is a bald-headed man. And so it's funny because all through school, people would be like, you look just like your dad. And I really think they would say it because I certainly didn't look like my mom. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? Like, so,
which happens biologically all of the time. I mean, that's true often that you may not look like your biological. So tell me a little bit, because I do find this interesting. How did they incorporate it so early on into your life that you were adopted to the point where they clearly did something well because you wanted to adopt? That's not always the case. And so talk to me a little bit about how they did that and your perspective as a child.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that there were a couple of, children's books that we had on hand that we would read as a family. I can't remember right now off the top of my head what they were.
If you find them out, let me know. We'll include it in the show notes.
I will. I'll ask I can tell you a little bit later what books we use with my children now, but
it's on my list to ask. You bet.
Yeah. But back in the 80s, there were a couple books that I can't remember now what they were, but just sort of instilling this sense of, and this is how I like to talk about it with other people too, for my daughters, is really illustrating to the child. And in this case, for me, illustrating your beginning. Like, how did you come into the world? You came into the world through another woman's belly. And she loved you so much that she knew she couldn't care for you. And so she, sought us out, and we became your parents because we had space in our heart and space in our home to raise a child. And I don't necessarily remember that exact language, but it was just, that was the overall vibe that I was just raised with. And so from the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I knew that I was adopted. I didn't necessarily understand, obviously, the intricacies of that, but I always knew that that's kind of where I came from and how I started. Now, I will say my story is a little bit unique in that I think if I really had to summarize like what it was that you just use the phrase, obviously it worked well. I think what worked well for me was just this sense that I was so loved. And so being raised a child that was just extremely loved. I had both sets of grandparents, that were relatively close by. I had this sense of family from the beginning, and just this overwhelming love, like this overwhelming, you can do anything, you can, just this support and this confidence. And because of that, I can't really look back and really see any time in my life when I really struggled with understanding my adoption. Now, that's not the case for everyone. It's actually quite the anomaly. I know that even my brother and close friends of mine that I have that were adopted kind of went through some sort of phase, whether it was in their teenage years or even younger, where they just kind of had those, hey, wait a minute, like those thoughts of like, why was I given up for adoption? Or why didn't my birth mother want me, so to speak? And I can't say that I ever really had that feeling. And I think it's because I was told by my mother, my adoptive mother, I was told that, your birth mother was a teenager. She walked into the doctor's office fully pregnant, very petite woman, very pregnant, saying, I simply can't care for this child. Can you help me?
Hmm.
And so from the beginning, I just had this sense of like empathy for her, like this sense of like, she knew what was best for me. And I trusted that. Like, it was just like, okay, well, this is where I am. And I can't complain because I'm so loved.
Yeah.
And so, again, that's not always the case. Like sometimes, a lot of times, you know, even small children will go through these sort of, I don't want to say rebellious phases, but these phases where it's really on their mind. Right.
Oh,
And
I mean, that all those emotions of anger, and even though you feel the gratitude, it still has to be that sense of loss. Absolutely. And trying to reconcile, like, other people go through the same things and they didn't give up their kid. Like, why did you? So it's, I can't empathize, but I can certainly sympathize with the range of emotions. Did you see anything specifically your parents did with your brother? I realize it's his story, but from your observations, did you see anything that you have taken away? I appreciated how they handled this, or I would do this differently.
I think, I mean, it was pretty much the same across the board for my brother and I both, as far as like just that overwhelming sense of love and family, and just, you know, I mean, I can think back to like my mother's side of the family was not local to us. And so whether it was my dad's family that was local to us, or my mom's, you know, I'm talking about like cousins and aunts and uncles and just extended family, we never were treated any differently. It was never like, oh, you know, well, these are the biological grandchildren and these are the adopted grandchildren. Like, there was never any sort of difference. It was always just, you know, if my grandma had a sweatshirt printed with all the grandchildren as teddy bears on it, like we were on there too, right? Like, or whatever. So yeah, so we just were always treated the same. And like we may as well have come from, you know, from my adoptive mother's belly, because that's how it felt. So I have this, it was actually like a cross stitch that was on my wall when I was growing up. And I actually had it done for Ellery too. That's my oldest daughter. It's in her bedroom. And it says, "Not flesh of my flesh, nor bone of my bone, but miraculously my own. Never forget, even for a minute, you weren't born under my heart, but in it." And it was just like, it was on my wall. And I read that thing over and over and over.
That's
and
so pretty.
As
Let's make sure that gets on the show notes. I'm talking to my producer now. That's beautiful. I love that.
Well, I think it's just, it was almost like an affirmation right there on my wall. And as a child, it was just like ingrained in me that this is the way everyone feels.
So you grew up in this adopted home, had a positive experience. Tell me a little bit about the transition and your struggle that ultimately led you to adoption.
Yeah. So it's funny because one of the questions that, you know, that a lot of people get, I think, as adopted children is, you know, do you ever want to meet your birth parents? And gosh, like all through high school, I can remember friends being like, so do you think you're going to meet your birth parents? And again, I think I'm a little bit of an anomaly in that I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I'm not necessarily seeking it out. Like for me, it just felt like just not something that I've ever come to a place to do. But I did come up against sort of a rock and a hard place in my 20s when I shared this on the first episode that we did. When I started struggling with chronic migraine, I started having health issues. And for me, it was like, gosh, if I had some sort of biological history, or if I had somebody to ask, like a biological mother or something, like, hey, are you dealing with, you know, things like infertility, migraine, any sort of hormone imbalances, like that would have been really helpful for me. So there was a period in my 20s where I really questioned, like, should I seek this out? Should I try to find this medical information? And all of that to say that, you know, this story of mine regarding chronic migraine and infertility with my husband was all interconnected, you know, and it's basically something where we got married in my early 20s. I started having headache issues, led me to disability from work and all kinds of, I call it hormone hell, basically, is where I was living. And I didn't realize that it was ever going to affect my fertility. Like, to me, it was just, these are headaches and I deal with them and I have to figure it out. So then when we got into our late 20s and we decided, okay, you know, we've been married for 5 or so years and nothing's happening, and I had been off of the birth control pill, we started to think like, okay, maybe we should seek some help. So we asked my OBGYN and she connected us to a fertility specialist. The fertility specialist met with us the very first day and basically told us that everything that we had been doing as far as using like urine test kits and all kinds of stuff like that, were just not accurate for someone like me at that time.
To determine when you were ovulating.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So there's things like ovulation predictor kits, like those little, the little urine tests that you can, pee on.
Or the apps.
Or the apps that try to predict, right? Like that's what we had been doing, thinking like, well, there's nothing wrong with us, like as far as like fertility goes. So he told us, oh no, that will never work for you, because I was a very low body fat percentage at the time, but we owned a gym together. So we were training really hard. And he's like, I think maybe you guys need to have some more intricate testing to see what's going on. So long story short, my husband had surgery. I had surgery to remove endometriosis. And we did 2 rounds of basically like ovulation injections, like to get me to ovulate multiple eggs. And then of course they give you that awesome time window, like you need to procreate between these hours. And we went through
special.
It's so special.
Meaningful.
Yeah. And so we did that for, I would say it was about a 4-month journey of just like between the 2 surgeries and then doing these little ovulation injections. And we got to this point where we were like, this is for the birds. Like, this is just, it was so stressful on our marriage. It was so stressful just in general. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking like, but what if I do get pregnant and I get these bad migraines again? Like I can't take medication when I'm pregnant. Like, so in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking like, oh no, like what if, because I had just overcome chronic migraine. Like I had just finally figured out what was going on with that. And if I'm being totally transparent, and this is something that I don't share often, I had never really had this like innate desire to have a child in my belly. And maybe some psychiatrists would say, or psychologists would say that that's from maybe me not experiencing that. Like I didn't have a birth mother my mother didn't have a baby in her belly for me to ever witness or something like that. Like, I don't know if it goes back to childhood, but I just have never had the desire to like feel the baby kicking in me or anything like that. And so I can remember like in my 20s when we were around couple friends and they were just like, oh my gosh, like, I love being pregnant. And I remember thinking in my mind, like, I don't think I could ever love being pregnant. And so I just never really had this, even though we were going through this, like we wanted children, we were going through the steps. It was so stressful, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what if the headaches, what if I hate being pregnant? What if I hate, And so finally we sat down with the fertility specialist and he said, okay, I think our only chance is, and he thought it was like a 30% chance based on the fact that both of us had infertility issues. He said, I really think that your best chance is in vitro. And we were like, okay, we need to sit on this. We need to think about it. And so we started talking to friends that had done it. And I think it's a blessing for so many people. But for us, especially when we talked to my functional medicine doctor and she said, I'm going to tell you it's up to you, but most likely it's going to put your hormones on a roller coaster. And we know that for you, that typically results in migraine. So she's like, I can't guarantee that you're going to go through this process totally, feeling great. And so that was enough for us to look at each other and say, why are we doing this? Like, we're happy. Like at that time we were thriving in my career. He was, he's always been sort of a business partner to me. We were loving our travels, like everything in our life was going well. It's just this one piece was just so stressful. And it's like, we even got to this point where it's like, do we even want children? Like, are we just good? Like, should we just,
you kind of look at everything with a new lens and think, what is our future going to hold?
That's right. Yeah. And so finally we decided to sit down with a local adoption attorney. Just so happened to be the same attorney that my parents used to adopt my brother, because they went through like a formal process when he was adopted. So we scheduled an appointment with them and we sat down for an hour. Great people. They actually finalized both of our adoptions that we have with our daughters, but we sat down with them and took some notes, and we left that hour appointment and we were both totally freaked out. Like we got into the car and we just didn't speak like the entire way home. We just were just silent. And when we
tell me a little bit about what freaked you out. Like what was it that scared you?
Yeah. So when my husband finally said like, so like, what did you think? I said, there's no way. And what freaked us out for both of us is, and of course an attorney's job is to, make sure that you understand every possible thing that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And so we felt like as great of guys as they are, right. And I'm sure, and they do this is what they do. They're adoption attorneys. They have a high success rate, but we were just like, we were totally blown away by, the odds that a baby could be drug addicted or could have, you have to make the choice of, are you okay with any sort of medical issues? Even just the concept of filling out paperwork to list preferences, like race, gender, all of it. We were just like, it was just so different than, and here I had grown up with this beautiful story, right? Of this woman walked in and she just happened to be a perfect match for your birth parent or, your adopted parents. And these magical angels came in and took care of the work. And so in my mind, it was like, where's that beautiful story? And so sitting down with the attorney.
And it's scary. It's scary too, because there's this weird range of emotions. Cause I totally get this. I mean, obviously we've gone through that as well. And I remember feeling like, I feel like I'm ordering something off of Amazon. I'm like clicking off the preferences that you see there on the sidebar. And it's like, this is a child. I shouldn't be, and so there's this sense of guilt almost like, well, I don't know what medical problems I can and can't handle. And then there's part of you that says, I should take anything. I should take any child. And then there's part of you that says, well, but I don't think I can handle XYZ. And if I mark that I can handle this, what if I can't handle it? I mean, it is a truly terrifying range of emotions. I think we're probably getting into this, but speak to that a little bit and how because the concern is we stop there and it's like, I just can't do this. And we never even take the next step forward. How do you encourage somebody who may be at that very point where you and I just mentioned we were both at? How do you encourage them to take the next step? What was your next step?
Well, usually I do get people that reach out to me just on social media and whatnot, asking for assistance. Like, hey, we're looking to adopt. What's your advice? And this is usually where they get hung up. Like they start to investigate either, usually it comes down to either finances. Like, is this something that we're going to be able to afford? Or it comes down to, am I emotionally ready? Am I confident enough in myself and my marriage and everything to do this? And so that's where we sort of found ourselves. And to be completely transparent, the best thing I can do is to just share like the rest of my story and tell you, like, looking back, if I could kind of go back in time to that moment when I was stopped, when I just was looking at this stack of paperwork, like, no way.
And it's a stack, people. It is a stack. I have sold and bought multiple homes. I have 2 masters in nursing, and I have never, ever seen so much paperwork in my life. Well, there should be. It's a child's life we're talking about, but
it is so much paperwork.
Be prepared. You will never have seen so much paperwork.
That's so true. Yeah. But if I could go back, I would just take a deep breath and tell myself, stop thinking and just do. Just take the next step. And that's what I tell a lot of women that I talk to is stop thinking of everything that can go wrong. This goes for health and fitness too, right? Like stop thinking of everything that can go wrong or any sort of emotional stress that's coming your way and just say, I'm going to take the next step. For us, we didn't take the next step at that moment. We let the paperwork sit on my desk for months. It sat there from November to April. I made a post on my Facebook. I have a Facebook following for my fitness page. And I had made a post on there with a picture of my brother and I for National Adoption Day. And I just said, like, so grateful that we were adopted into such an amazing family. Just a little post basically about it and hashtagged National Adoption Day. And this girl that had gone to high school with my brother reached out to me in a direct message, which was on through my Facebook business page, which I didn't even see for a couple of days. And it's just said, hey, I actually kind of forgot that you and your brother were both adopted. It just so happens that I have a coworker and a good friend of mine who is, I think at the time, a few months pregnant and is considering adoption. Would you be willing to talk to her? Because I think, this friend of my brother's like knew that we were raised in this healthy family environment and that adoption was a good thing for us and wanted us to just talk to this friend of hers to see, to kind of convince her that adoption was the right way to go. And so I remember telling my husband, Chris, about this, and he looked at me like, oh gosh, like if she's thinking about adoption, like, should we be those people that say, we're here, And so our story did turn out so beautiful. And I think it always does. but we literally just reached out to her directly and said, or actually our friend connected us at first. We had a phone conversation. She told us she would be interested in meeting us. We drove to Ohio, ironically, is also where my daughter was born. We drove there and I canceled all plans. I had this big event planned for my team. My team was probably like, why is this being canceled? Like, we canceled everything for the weekend.
To go to Ohio.
Yeah, we're going to Ohio. Yeah. So, and we
said no one ever about Ohio. Sorry,
right.
Continue.
No, I totally agree. So we sat down with her at dinner, and she just, I guess, fell in love with us, and we fell in love with her. And from that moment on, it was, we were going to become Ellery's parents. And we knew it was a girl. We knew she was coming in September, and her birth mother kept us in the loop the entire journey. We really had a really seamless process the first time around. We were there for her birth. She came out of the womb and landed on my chest. And so it's one of those things where, here we were letting like all of our hesitations and our fears get in the way. And someone from above was like, you know what? No, we're just going to put this baby in your lap. Yeah. And then you're going to see that you should have just taken that next step. So we were kind of pushed, I guess, from up above to do it and to just keep taking that next step, even when it came to this person. Like, it was so scary. I mean, you want to talk about, that's a subject in itself, like the relationship between adoptive mother and birth mother through the process.
Especially because for many, I mean, from the stories that I hear, it sounds like even that experience that you had is unique, that it is more unique to have a birth mother good at keeping you up to date and keeping you in the loop. More often than not, as adoptive parents, you are very much out of the loop, which is one of the very great struggles. And there's so many unknowns, but still there's unknowns even in your story. There's always unknowns. Oh, yes. It's easy to compare your story and be like, well, but ours is so much harder. Okay. There's always, the point is you still took a risk. You still took a risk.
Yes. And I mean, ours was definitely not, it was as smooth as I think could possibly be, but at the same time, we definitely had moments of insane fear, especially in the hospital after she was born, right? Like, birth mother had indicated at first that she didn't want any sort of connection. She just wanted us to have separate rooms and for the baby to come to our room. And we were told in advance, I feel like they do a good job of preparing you in advance. Like, these are the things that can change. These are the things that can happen. And in the hospital, she changed her mind and she kept wanting to see Ellery, and that was fine with us. But there were a couple times where she would have her for a couple hours. And my husband and I are literally just sweating, like sitting in the room next door, like, what's happening? Like just drenched in sweat and just shaking all over, wondering if she was going to change her mind, wondering, what that conversation was looking like. So our journey was by no means easy. But I think when I look back on it, and especially when I hear stories of others, I think we were so blessed that that the birth mother was health conscious. There were no drugs involved. We did not have as smooth of a process the second time around with our Sutton, but we had everything we needed as far as the guts and the willingness to pursue it, because we had, we knew we could. We had done it once, and it was like, we're going to do this again. So,
yeah. Well, and I think the beautiful thing to take away, period, from any story like this is that there's so much beauty that comes out of unknown. And you just have to be willing to take those steps forward. And it is a risk, but again, it's one of those things where you don't know until you take that leap of faith. And everyone's story does look different, and some are maybe smoother than others. But at the end, it's like you just said, it's a risk that has the potential for an immeasurable reward. It can't even really be measured or a value put on it. We're going to take a quick break, but we come back. Stay tuned to hear more of Jenny's story. We're going to dive into her sweet family, and we're going to talk about some of the resources that she recommends that has made the difference in their adoption journey and their process right when we come back. You have tried it all. Worried you will never lose the extra weight or reclaim the energy you once enjoyed? Want to achieve fat loss without spending hours in a gym or eliminating entire food groups from your diet? Well, now you can. In the virtual Faster Way to Fat Loss with Anna, my 6-week fitness and nutrition program, You will learn how to pair effective 30-minute workouts with all-natural, evidence-based nutritional strategies to leverage what you eat and when you eat to reset your metabolism and burn fat fast, even that stubborn belly fat. I am a dual certified nurse practitioner passionate about teaching sustainable strategies to promote fat loss and prevent disease. I have cheered on thousands of clients who have done just that with the Faster Way program. In my 6-week program, the average client currently sheds 7 inches of body fat. 93% report more energy, and 89% state that their mental health has improved. 100% of clients report they feel this program is sustainable. Curious to try the program but not sure if the strategies will work for you? Try the Faster Way strategies for free. Head to www.hammersandhugs.com and sign up for my free 7-day fat loss accelerator course today and start your own transformation story. We are back here with Jenny Swisher. We've just been talking about her adorable kids. She has Ellery and Sutton, and these are the cutest little girls you've ever seen. I was just saying, when I see her littlest one's pictures on Facebook, it makes me smile every time. She's the cutest little cheeks. It makes me smile. It's the only reason I love Facebook is for all the babies and the cute kids. Let's be really honest.
Absolutely. And dogs, sometimes cute dogs too.
And they're sometimes cute. I mean, I always take a cute puppy. I'm definitely partial to kids, but that's why I don't have a dog. Will have 4 kids. So you guys adopted transracially. So Ellery and Sutton are African-American. You and your husband are Caucasian. Tell me a little bit. There's so much that could be expanded on, in this conversation, but what kind of education did you do to prepare yourselves for an interracial family? And what was the thought process going into it? How did you and your husband even have the conversation of race and what you were willing to bring into your family and the kind of conversations that you had around that? So conversations and then education you did to prepare yourselves.
Yeah, those are great questions. So like I mentioned, when we came home with that stack of paperwork and we were sort of stopped in fear, I would say that, one of the many things that stopped us was this idea of preferences, right? Like, what races are you open to adopting and what races are you not open to adopting? And I kept saying to my husband, like, how could we ever identify? Like, to me, it's like, I can love a baby regardless. Like, right. However, and this comes up in my conversations with women who are looking to adopt as well. Sometimes you have to take into account just your life, and your life's like, at that time, we lived in a very Caucasian neighborhood. We lived in a very Caucasian suburb of a very Caucasian county. You know what I mean? Like and so you also have to think about like, well, yes, I'm open to a baby of any race, but what would that life experience be like for the baby? So I think that looking back, if we had filled out that paperwork, we probably would have specified, to be completely transparent, we probably would have specified not out of any sort of like racism or prejudice, but just more of comfort for ourselves. We would have chosen a race, the same as ours. But like I said, God had other plans. And so we knew that, obviously we felt like this connection with Ellery's birth mother was just meant to be. Like, it had literally landed in our lap. And so when she told us at that first meeting, that she wasn't sure if the child would be African-American or biracial, African-American or Caucasian, it didn't even matter to us, because it was like, well, we're sitting here with you we don't even know how like this even happened. So, okay, like whatever it is, we're going to, it'll make it work. And Ellery was born, like I said, we were in the room, and she came out with this full head of just, dark black African-American hair. And so we knew right from the beginning, like, okay, like we know, right? Like this is going to be different, and this is something we're going to have to travel. But because of that, because going into it, we knew that it could be either or. Our home study company, and a home study is something that domestically here in the United States, you have to complete before being legally approved for adoption. And you do for international adoption too, by the way. Okay, good to know. Regardless. Yep. So we had to do that. And ours was interesting because most of the couples that were going through the home study process at the time that we were sort of still on a list. They were still trying to be paired. Whereas we had a birth mother and a baby, and we were sort of retroactively getting the home study done. So we were a little bit more rushed in our education process. So they required, I think it was 40 hours between the two of us each. We both had to complete 40 hours of education, and half of that had to be transracial adoption related. So I would say that the most helpful thing for us was the agency that we went through for the home study did a lot of live webinars where people of all different colors and races would contribute to the conversation on what it's like to be raised a biracial child in a Caucasian family, or what it's like to be raised, an Asian child in a Black family, or whatever the case was. And so we just heard a lot of different anecdotes and stories. And those were probably the most powerful things for us. Because
was there anyone in particular that stands out to you now that especially resonated with you, or what was a takeaway that was very
I think the number one takeaway actually came when we had to go through it again for Sutton's adoption. We had to go through the home study again. And so when we did it for her, at that time we knew, like, you know what I mean? Like the first time around, we're like, this could be a Caucasian baby, or, whereas the second time around, we already had a biracial child, and we knew that our second was going to be as well. And so we kind of dove deeper, I guess you could say. So one of the webinars, the lady that was leading it, and this is probably my number one takeaway in general, she said that you have to think about putting yourselves, especially as white parents, in the place where you are the minority. So, think about like your day-to-day life. Like when you go to church, are you in the minority, or are your children in the minority? When you go to the hair salon, are you in the minority, or is your child in the minority? And so those types of things, just hearing it that way was like, oh my gosh, like, I mean, it sounds so silly, but I had never really thought of it. And at this time, we already had a 4-year-old, so it really influenced, we made a lot of changes after just hearing that one piece of advice. Like we changed churches, we've changed hairstylists, like we've changed so many different things to just help our children feel surrounded by people like them, And
it's such a beautiful picture and powerful statement. It's so funny that you said that, because we recently went to Mexico on a vacation with my in-laws. They blessed us with this trip to Mexico as a family. And we were walking on the beach, my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law and father-in-law for a period of time lived in Africa. And my husband was a really little baby. And my mother-in-law made this statement at one point. We were talking about our own adoption, and, we're also adopting a colored child and what that looks like, and what are proactive things that I'm doing even now to try to prepare a family. And she made the statement about their time in Africa. And she said, everyone should have the experience of being the minority at some point in their lives. Every race, every person should experience what it is like to be the minority. And I remember even then thinking like, well, that's a quotable. And you're saying that very thing. And it really has resonated with me when she said that. And I love that you are repeating that same concept, because I think it is so helpful and empowering in many ways to practically think through how I can make this work in my own family. So I just wanted to share that. It's such a powerful statement. And I love that you said that.
Well, I think it's one of those things where, and this goes for any mother, adoptive or not, like, you start to see the world through your children's eyes, especially as they become verbal. And, like my 5-year-old is very opinionated, and now already somehow into fashion at age 5. Like she's growing up so fast, and you start to really see through, right? Like those things. We had an experience at Christmas time where she has, her preschool has diversity, definitely, but it's still dominantly Caucasian. And a couple of her close little friends are Caucasian blonde haired girls, right? They look like Elsa. They can braid their hair like Elsa. These are things that you don't think about until you have a child who can't braid her hair like Elsa, or who doesn't look like Elsa. God bless Encanto for being released, because my child looks like Mirabelle. So for her to be able to say, I look like her, is so huge, but I digress. So anyways, her little
that
friend,
is beautiful though. I think that's a practical takeaway right there, is if, you're struggling with the concept of adopting a child that is a different race, it's those little practical things. It's looking for movies, obviously age appropriate, that are showcasing ethnicities similar to your child's. I think that's just a practical books that are, anyway, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. So her little friends were, her two little girlfriends were wanting a Barbie dream house for Christmas. And so when it came time for Christmas at our house, I said, okay, well, we got to tell Santa what you want for Christmas. And she kept saying a Barbie dream house. And we would walk by at a Target and I'd be like, that's what you want? And long story short, a couple days before Christmas, she says to me, Mama, I do like the Barbie dream house, but I really like the LOL house, which is a different doll for those of you listening who I didn't know these things either until children, but I always had a Barbie dream house when I was a kid, but she really wanted this LOL house. And this is not to shame Barbie. Barbie is a very diverse brand. Like they definitely have Barbies of all colors, but LOL has really blown up the racial. I mean, they have dolls of all colors, all hairstyles, like you name it, they've got it covered. And it made me realize like, she likes that. She likes to have dolls that look more like her or that she can style more like she likes. Right. And so those are things that we've had to pay extra attention to, like and we really try to encourage her. She said to me the other day, something about what somebody else liked. And I said, well, do you like it? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, then that's all that matters. And so just, taking her confidence to a level of like, you don't have to have a Barbie dream house. Like if you don't feel comfortable with the Malibu Barbie situation, like then by all means, let's do the more ethnic Barbie.
I mean, who of us really looks like Barbie? Let's be honest.
Yeah. So, but one thing that we've really tried to, I knew from the very beginning, especially going through that education, and especially being somebody who I consider myself sort of like a personal growth junkie, I knew that there would be a lot of things that I cannot control, like through raising a child of a different race. There are a lot of things that I can't control. I can't necessarily control what other people say to her. I can, however, control how she thinks about that or how she responds.
Absolutely.
And so from the time she was a year old, we started reading books about, skin colors, and we have some books that are called Little Leaders in Black History. And so we read about people who she knows, she'll bring up names sometimes. Like she asked my mom if she knew Jackie Joyner Kersey. And my mom was like, no. He's like the track star with the long fingernails. You know what I mean? With the long fingernails. But regardless, like I just wanted her to feel confident in who she is. And so a lot of times people will say to me, well, what is it like raising a child of another race, and how do you handle those differences? And I tell them, well, we do it step by step, like we do it day by day. And she literally is becoming someone who is so confident in herself. And I surely hope it continues, because she says to me the other day, this little boy that she's really close friends with at preschool asked her, why is your skin so dark?
Yeah.
And she came home and told me the story, because she tells me everything. So she comes home and she's like, my friend asked me why my skin is so dark. And I said, well, what did you say? And she said, I told him, why is your skin so light? And
girl, that's
I was just like, you know what I mean? Like mic drop. Like, I don't think I think we're doing okay. So, but she told him, she said, well, I have biracial skin, and she's very aware. And, if you're listening to this as someone, especially, who's maybe a Caucasian parent of a Caucasian child, talk to your kids about race. Like I think that's my biggest thing is I can always tell when her little friends are people who, their families have discussed it, what I mean? And so they, like her little bestie, they love to talk about their differences. Like they'll put their arms next to each other and she'll say, you're so tan. And, it's like a joking, laughing, loving thing. And they love each other for it. And it's such a beautiful thing, as opposed to a child who doesn't know how to handle a kid of another race. So that's just sort of a little tidbit that I've learned being on the other side.
Absolutely. And I think too, one of the things that this is also true even from a fitness nutrition standpoint, is making sure that even our children are, and maybe we need to remind ourselves this as well, is making sure that no one feels valued because of a physical appearance or attribute, meaning you are not more valuable because you're white. You're not less valuable because you're white. Your value is not determined by your skin color. It is simply who you are. You have, more melanin, and that is what makes your skin tone darker. Like also trying to help our children see it in a more physiological way, as opposed to assigning some sort of value. Your value is not in how you appear. There's a physiological reason you look that way. God designed you with a little bit more melanin, but that's not what makes you more or less valuable. What makes you valuable is that you are a precious girl who has been made in the image of God, period, regardless of your skin color, regardless of how fit you are, regardless of how objectively beautiful you are or not, compared to how the world sees you. Like, you've been made in the image of God. You are valuable, period. So I think for parents too, listening, thinking like, how do I objectively help my children think more in that way? I think we need to change our own perspective at times and stop assigning, whether it's subconscious or conscious, value to certain physical attributes, and that extends to really anything, whether it be your success in life, your achievements in life. They don't define you. They're just kind of part of your development or part of your physiological being. So anyway, I love her response though. It's just that like if we could think more like children.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Why are you so white? Like,
isn't that great? Like,
amen.
I didn't know what she was going to say. And that was her response. And I thought, perfect. That's just perfect. I said, well, what did he say back to you? She's like, nothing. It's like,
yeah. And they're young. They're probably like, okay, conversation over. Like, great conversation. Now let's go find a toy. I love that. You mentioned this earlier. Money is, in my experience and conversations, probably the number one reason families don't adopt. I think there's a lot of families who have had a lot of the conversations that I know you and I have both had with their spouses, and they would love to adopt. They're on board, but money is the number one reason they don't feel like they can. Can you name some resources or organizations that you personally recommend to help adoptive families raise the funds or help with this hurdle?
Yeah. So this is a question that I actually am excited to ask you on my podcast. And I'm planning on also having a little adoption series where I can dive deeper into this, because this is something that my husband and I did not take advantage of and we did not do. Yeah. The first time around with Ellery, we didn't have to go through sort of the marketing dollars, so to speak. We didn't have to, because we were sort of already matched with somebody through friendship.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Our first adoption was not it was definitely a cost. There was a cost to it, but it was not quite to the extent of what most people will pay.
For people listening, give them a sense of what is the average cost for a domestic adoption.
I would say you're looking at around $20,000.
At least,
yeah. I would say at minimum. Yeah. So we were very fortunate the first time through, like I said, that we didn't go through those sort of marketing dollars. But one thing that and this is something that I want to mention, I've had people connect me to couples that are looking to adopt who are kind of in that sort of rock and a hard place. Like they're at that stopping point where they're afraid. And so this is something that in the future, in the next year or two, I'd like to pursue myself, is just to kind of help educate couples on how to go about an adoption process, how to become emotionally confident, how to go through a home study, how to keep taking the next step. I'd really like to walk alongside people in that journey. But
I can't wait, by the way. That makes me so excited just to hear.
It's so needed.
Let's go. I love it.
Because like I mentioned before, and this is something I didn't say, when you asked me what was so helpful during our education, those webinars were amazing. However, the textbooks from the 1960s were not so helpful. So I think that couples going through this, they need modern information. They need help, like much more help than I felt like we received, even though the agencies were great. Like they were so helpful in a lot of things, but there was so much that was left unsaid. So all of that to say, this is something that I'm working on. And I've decided just in the last year when couples have come to me, I've offered them the ability to just kind of consult with them. I'm considering it kind of like a heart project for myself. Like my primary business is my health and fitness business, but I feel like it's on my heart to help these people through, because they are at that point where they're just going to shut down. And so, the fundraising concept or the financial aspect of this is what holds a lot of people back. Obviously, there are couples that are in this position of, do I invest in vitro? Because that's also expensive. Or do I invest in adoption? What happens if I put my money into in vitro and then I'm out of money? I can't, So I have heard so many great stories from people who have adopted, who have had great success with fundraising. And that's something that I definitely want to hear more about from those people who've done it. From my perspective, being an online marketer, somebody who has built a business online for the last 12, 13 years, I can tell you that there's so much you can do, even just in marketing yourself, to help raise not just funds, but also just raise awareness and share your story about looking to adopt. I mean, you think about the fact that I made one post on my Facebook page and somebody reached out, right? Like, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have thousands of followers. You just need the right person, the one right person. And so I'll tell you the story of this woman who came to me. I would say it was around fall of last year. She was referred to me by somebody who had taken my hormone course. She is a single woman, high executive in a pharmaceutical company, and has always had a desire to adopt. And she wants to be a parent, so she's tried sperm donor. She's tried that. She's gone through all the rigmarole to try to figure out how she could have a baby herself. And it hasn't worked. And so she's been so frustrated. So she came to me, she was referred to me by this friend because she was in a place where she's like, I just don't think I'm not going to be able to do this, because she's like, I'm closing in on 40. Like, and now I'm getting too old to be a parent, like she had all these things in her head. And, it turns out that a lot of agencies were turning her away because she was not a married couple. And I wasn't even aware that was even an option. Like, I just assumed if somebody was willing to pay the money to an agency, that they would get a place on their website and they would try to, but that's not the case. And so she has been really struggling because she is not able to find somebody who will help connect her to a birth mother. And so we had a couple phone calls. I got to know her. I did some research. We found an agency out of Atlanta, Georgia, that she's now on their list. And she said to me, I want you to keep working with me, because I think you could really help me sell myself, right? Like, I think you can really help me market myself. And I think that I could do a course on that. Like, I could do a course on that.
For people listening who may not understand this, because this is even different in international adoption, but in domestic adoption, especially if you're wanting to adopt from birth, what Jenny is talking about is there's literally this whole process of, you have to market yourself to the birth mom, because the birth mom, as it should be, it is within her power to decide who gets her baby, again, as it should be. But it's this whole process of trying to market your family. Talk about stress in a whole nother way. So that's what Jenny's talking about here. I mean, you literally have to put together almost like your family's resume and why that birth mom should pick you as the family. So just lots and lots. Lots of challenges here.
It's like an online profile, basically. So it's almost like you're setting up your own little online profile for yourself. And the reality is that agencies or attorneys, whoever you're working with, they have a template and they tell you, we need a picture of you and we need you to fill, it's like an ad lib, right? Like, here, we need you to fill this in. And so every single profile looks the exact same. Every picture is almost always like a couple, like holding hands by a lake or something.
By a lake in Ohio.
I'm not making fun of you. I'm just helping. And so when I was speaking with this lady, she's like, I don't know, like, after talking with you a few times, I think this is something you could help me with. So I helped her dive into her profile. And, I set her up she had a photographer come and took real pictures, candid photos of her doing what she loves, like cooking in the kitchen and hiking with her dog and stuff like that. And I thought, this is what a birth mother wants to see. They want to see, like, what does your life look like? What do you love and care about? Sutton's birth mother chose us because she thought, she said she loved that we were high school sweethearts and that she loved how close we were in all of our pictures. Like, I intentionally chose photos where my husband's arms were around my neck, like, as opposed to the hands by the lake. Right. So just certain small things like that, like just
in the fall, it's always in the fall too.
Always. Why are
with the beautiful leaves of it?
Yeah.
That's going to be our family picture this year. And Jenny's going to laugh.
So there's nothing wrong with it, but I just think that in itself is,
it's a unique challenge there. Yeah.
Yes. And so I know your question was about fundraising and all of that, but I think the two go hand in hand, right? Like, yes, I'm sure there are resources out there that you're probably better equipped to talk about as far as raising funds for your own adoption, but also you have to think about the fact that a lot of times what your money is going toward is marketing you, whether it's paying the agency to market you, paying the attorney to market you, right? Like, I know for our attorney, I think it was around $10,000 just for them to list us on their website, for them to list us in newspapers. Sounds so old school, but things like that, and you're like, so a lot of the expenses, in my opinion, could potentially be limited by you doing sort of
your own
the work on you to market yourself.
Yeah. And so this is really interesting because we don't have that in international adoption. We're not marketing we're not marketing ourselves. It's truly like, these are the waiting children who are
Yeah.
orphaned in this country. And,
It's
you're
different.
matched, assuming that you've, completed all the right paperwork, et cetera. So
Yeah.
like our adoption, for example, will probably be anywhere from $50,000 to $55,000.
Yeah.
So anyway, these are all the differences. And then fostering to adopt's a whole nother avenue. There's several people coming onto my podcast to talk more about these different areas. And I can't wait to be on Jenny's
Yes.
podcast. There's so many amazing things that you need to go over and check out Jenny's podcast. And it's called, tell everyone the name of your podcast where they can.
Yeah. So my podcast is Sync Your Life. It's all about women's hormone health.
And adoption.
And adoption. Yeah. Pretty soon I'm going to be doing an adoption series on there. So it'll be coming here in the near future.
Yeah. Jenny, one last question. So one of the things that has been the most powerful realization to me in the whole adoption process is interviews that I've done and testimonies that I've heard. It seems to me that the power of adoption is not in the way that it changes the life of a child, but in the way that the life of that child changes everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Share with me the number one way that having your girls has changed your life.
Oh gosh, that's a deep question. Well, I would say in so many ways. Let me see if I can come up with the biggest thing. I think, I think back to, this is a story that I've rarely shared, but I think back to the day that we were leaving the hospital with Ellery, and people who know me know that I'm not a highly emotional person. Like, I'm very type A, in control, I've got my plan. Like that's what I'm sticking to it. Well, I have, prior to that day, I had never been a parent before. It was all new to me. I was so scared. I was literally like so nervous, because not only was I in the birthing room of another woman, but I was going to take that baby home. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I was so afraid, like I was, all the questions that probably every new mother asks, like, oh gosh, like, how do I change the diaper again? Or how do I, when I do the bath, what am I supposed to do? Like, do I put her head, like all those questions where you're like, those logistical questions were all over me. Like I was just totally consumed by, what if I'm not going to do this right?
Yeah.
And I remember going into the whole situation feeling like my number one fear was, what if I get there and I just don't feel the love for this child that I thought I would? It was so scary to me, like I didn't know what color she was going to be. I didn't know anything, you know what I mean? And so I just was going into this unknown. And it's like you said in the beginning, like the unknown is sometimes what is the most beautiful thing. And so I remember, like, after she was born and her birth mother was leaving the hospital, we were getting ready to be discharged. Her birth mother came to the room and I was a mess. I was just like, this is the girl who always has it together. And I was just a complete mess, like basically on my knees, like, just in tears. The whole situation, I mean, we didn't get to talk about this, but the whole situation in the hospital is such a roller coaster. It's such an emotional roller coaster. And so I just remember her birth mother came over to me, and she was the most laid back person. And she came over and she gave me a big hug, and she said, only happy tears. And that will always stick with me. Like, because I just remember thinking, like, okay, like she thinks I can do it, and she just trusted me with this child. And so from that day forward, it really, I think that the biggest takeaway and the biggest thing that my children have taught me is that you're never going to know like what's coming. You're never going to know what to expect. You're never going to know the right thing to say. You're never going to know, there's so much you're not going to know. And at the same time, like, God will put the words in your mouth that you need at that moment, or he will give you the actions that you need to take. And so you just have to trust, right? Like you just have to, like I said it in the beginning, but taking the next step. I'm sure that as Ellery gets older and as both of our girls get older, there's going to be things that come up as far as racial, questions, and even questions pertaining to birth mothers and, adoption, their stories and how they're beginning, right? Like we talked about. And so just having the ability to trust that I am the person for them, that I was chosen for them for a reason, and that the words will come to me and the actions will come to me. But both of them have taught me such grace, like just, like be in the moment, like be all here, because certainly someone thought that I should be the parent and that my husband should be the parent for our children. And there's so much that they've taught me, and I could go on, and maybe someday it'll be a book. But for now, I think the biggest thing is just to sort of, they've taught me to just trust that I am the right person for them, and that this is exactly what they need and where they should be, and exactly where I should be and what I need.
Yeah. What I heard from that is to trust that you were chosen.
Yeah.
And you will be enough because of that.
Yep.
That's beautiful. Well, you definitely want to check out Jenny. Jenny is at jennyswisher.com is her website. Certainly you can check her out for her expertise in hormone health and syncing fitness and nutrition, especially as women. And stay tuned. Jenny's got a lot of amazing things coming from the adoption standpoint. And Jenny, I'm so grateful for your heart. And I can't wait to be on your podcast to sync your life with Jenny Fisher. You want to check out Jenny's podcast. And I just pray God's blessing over your whole family, and just keep those pictures coming. I want to see more Sutton's cheeks. I mean, they're both adorable, but she makes my day every single time I see her. She's so cute.
Yeah, you can't help but share her. They're both so cute.
That's right. Yes. They are both.
I'm here for your journey too. I'm so excited to see how everything transpires for you, and to have you on the podcast again. It'd be great.
Thanks. Take care, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Imperfectly Empowered podcast. It is my honor to be here with you. I am so grateful for each and every one of you. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button below so you don't miss a show, and leave a comment with your thoughts from today's episode below. If you are listening via your preferred podcasting platform, would you help keep us on the air by rating our show and leaving an honest review of your thoughts from today? In case you haven't heard it lately, your story matters and you are loved. This is your host, Ahnafulmer, and I will see you here next time on the Imperfectly Empowered podcast.